Hi everyone, today I'm going to be looking at the 2012 J2 problem from the CCC. It's called Sound Fishy. So let's read the problem real quick. Problem description: a fish finder is a device used by anglers to find fish in a lake. If the fish finder finds a fish, it will sound an alarm. It uses depth reading to determine whether to sound an alarm. For our purposes, the fish finder will decide that a fish is swimming past if there are 4 consecutive depth readings which form a strictly increasing sequence, right? So like 3, 4, 7, 9. So that's increasing. We're going to say fish is rising. If there are 4 consecutive depth readings which form a strictly decreasing sequence, so going down 9, 6, 5, 2, we're going to say fish is diving. Or if there are 4 consecutive depth readings which are identical, which will say constant depth. All other readings will be considered random noise or debris, which we'll call no fish. So for any other case scenario, we're going to say no fish. So if it's increasing so we're going to get 4 numbers. If it's increasing, we're going to say fish rising. If it's decreasing, we're going to say, if it's strictly decreasing, continuously decreasing, or continuously increasing, fish rising or fish diving. And if they're identical, we're going to say constant. And here we're going to say no fish. So input parameters, the input will be 4 positive integers in an array representing the depth reading. The output is one of 4 possibilities in the form of a string. If the depth reading are increasing, then fish rising. If it's decreasing, then fish diving. If they're identical, then you say constant depth. Otherwise, you say no fish. So here's a sample. It's going to say no fish because it's not increasing, decreasing, or identical. This thing right here is going to say fish rising because it's increasing. So let's go ahead and solve these mentally here. 2, 15, 17, 22, that's obviously fish rising. So I just created a comment here. We're actually going to solve this 5, 4, 3, 1. That's strictly decreasing, so that's fish diving. And this is obviously all identical, so constant depth. And here, since we've got a rise and a decrease, there is no pattern, so we're going to say no fish. So how do we solve this? So I'm going to solve it in 2 ways. The first way only works if there's only 4 numbers, no more, no less. And this will actually work for this particular problem because it is a J2. So they're telling you here that the input will always be 4. So this is really easy. So all you have to do is really write a simple if statement. And by the way, let me preface this. Xcode is extremely buggy, and when I was solving this myself before, Xcode crashed probably 25 times every time I would put the curly brace on the if statement. So if it crashes, excuse me for it. I'll probably be copying and pasting some code from my other files on my other screens just to save you the trouble of crashing and the trouble of me editing the video later on. So real quick, let's see how we're going to do this. So I'm going to write func find answer, right? I'm going to call this 1 because I'm going to find 2 ways to do this. And we're going to pass in 1 parameter. We're going to call it array. And we're going to put in whatever array this is. It's going to be of an array of ints. And we're going to return a string. And that's pretty much it. That's our function definition right here. Alright, so let's get started here. I'm going to do some typing and then I'll fast forward and I'll explain to you what I'm doing here, okay? Okay, so let's have a look here. So, let me just change this to nil here. Oh. Okay. Okay, so let's have a look here. So it's a simple if statement. I said, listen, take the first index of the array compared with the second index. If it's smaller and the second index is smaller than the third index and the third index is smaller than the fourth index, then say fish is rising. If the first index is greater than the second index and the second index is greater than the third index and the third index is greater than the fourth index, fish diving. And if all indices are equal to each other, right beside each other, then constant depth, otherwise no fish. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to call this find answer A, and I'm going to put in array 1, and it should return, if I run this, it should return fish rising like we expected. So I'm going to copy and paste this 4 times, except I'm going to change this to array 2, I'm going to change this to array 3, and I'm going to change this to array 4. And if we run all of this, and surely enough, fish rising, fish diving, constant depth, and no fish, just like we expected. And of course, if I change this, for example, if I change this to a 5, constant depth should obviously change, the third one should change to no fish, and surely enough, it does. Or for example, if I change this 22 to a 29, for example, so now we've got a strictly increasing, it should change from no fish to rising, and surely enough, if I do this, it goes back to rising. All right, so this method would have solved this problem, and this would satisfy this whole problem because it is a J2. But this solution really only works if there's 4 elements in an array and only 4 elements, not less, not more. If it's less, it's not going to know what that last thing is. If it's more, then it's not going to count the last one, and it'll skew your results. And in here, it only asks us, it tells us, in fact, the input specification will be 4 positive integers. So always 4 positive integers. So that's why this is a really easy question. And that really solves it. Now, what happens, however, what happens if I said, I want you to solve this, but I want you to solve it so that it solves for anything, for any number. It could be 2 elements in the array or 600. How would you do something like that? So I'll show you my solution. I'm going to copy and paste this for speed, but I'll explain every line of code, okay? So hang a second. So I went and commented my first answer here, and the second answer here, fish finder, I called it, and this is really the solution that will essentially return any sort of will return the answer regardless of how big the array is, and I'll show you in a sec. So let's go ahead and copy this array down here just so that it's closer to us so we can read it. Okay, so let's look at the array here. So this is the same data that we've got. Okay, so our function definition, fish finder, that's what we called it, is taking one array of type int, so that's obviously the arrays that I'm going to put in here, and it's going to return a string. So let's check this out. Inside, I've created a few variables. The first is first action. It's of type double array, and I've initialized it to be empty. I'll explain what this is in a sec. String result, and I'm going to put the answer here, and I've got fish action sum as a double. I'll explain why that is. So first, I started with a loop. And essentially, the loop goes, this is the loop counter, the index, and it goes from 0 to the count of the array. So whatever is inputted here. So if there's 4, then I'll go to 4 minus 1, right? If there's 600, 600 minus whatever, 1, right? So it goes through the whole array. That's all you need to know about this. And essentially, I'm saying, listen, look at the first iteration. The first iteration will be the first index of the array, and compare it to the one next to it, which is index plus 1, right? The one next to it. And if it's smaller, then append 1.0 to fish action. Remember, fish action is a variable that holds an array of doubles. So append 1.0. If it's greater, append 2.0, and if it's the same, append 3.0, and that's what that is, right? And you go through it over and over and over and over again. So if it's strictly increasing, I'm gonna finish with an array of 1.0, 1.0, 1.0, 1.0, 1.0. If it's strictly decreasing, I'm gonna finish with an array of 2.0, 2.0, 2.0, 2.0, 2.0. If it's all the same numbers, it's gonna be 3.0, 3.0, 3.0. Now, if it's a mixed match, I'll have 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 1.0, 2.0, 2.0, 3.0, it'll be a mix, right? So that's what I'm going to have. I'm going to have one of these 4 options after this loop finishes, all right? And then I've got another loop here that essentially just finds the sum. So I go through a loop and I loop through this, right? So through fish action.count, and I essentially say, listen, fish sum, which is 0 right now, I say on the first iteration, look at the first index, whatever it is. If it's a 1.0, add it here. Then go to the second thing and add it and add it and add it. After we go through the whole fish, if we go through the whole fish action, I'll have a sum of the whole array, right? So if it's 1.0 and there's 10 elements, it'll be 10. If it's 2.0 and there's 10 elements, it'll be 20. If it's 3.0 and 10 elements, it'll be 30. If it's 10 elements and it's a mixed match, it'll be not 10, 20, or 30. So what I've done here is, in this simple if statement, I go if fish action sum divided by, and I had to convert this to a double because it's an integer right now. If essentially the fish action sum divided by the count, right? So if there's 10 and the action is, and the sum is 10 and there's 10 elements, well, 10 divided by 10 will give me an exact 1.0. If the result is 1.0, then we know the fish is rising. If the result is 2.0, then we know it's strictly diving, and we're going to say diving. If it's 3.0, then we know the whole array is made up of 3.0s and it's constant depth. However, if it's not 1.0 or 2.0 or 3.0, it means it's a mixed match because we didn't get an exact 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0. So we know it's a mix, and therefore we're going to say no fish. And then I'm just returning string result, which is these strings. Cool. So let's try this out. Let's go ahead and run these. So our action is called fish finder. Let's go ahead and run this, and I'm going to put in array 1, and I'm going to put fish finder array 2, and I'm going to say fish finder array 3, and I'm going to say fish finder array 4. So if we run this, surely enough, we'll get the same answer as we did before, which is fish rising, fish diving, constant depth, no fish, right? Okay, well, that's to be expected. Now what happens if we actually, did this, right? Now there's 5. Will this still work? You bet. Well, it still says fish rising because obviously it's still rising. But check this out. If I go here and do something smaller, 76, now it's rising, 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 then decreasing. This should show no fish. And there's 6 elements. Well, will it work? Of course it will. It says no fish, right? And we could do the same thing here, right? So I could go 55, 55, 55, 55. This is all constant. This is all great. It should stay constant. But as soon as I change it to something that's different, and surely enough, it's going to say no fish. Cool. So it works with as many elements as possible because I'm actually adding in 1s, 2s, or 3s, dividing it by the sum, and yeah, I'm getting the exact answer. So this would probably be like a J3 level question, I think. And obviously this is a J1 level question. You could see the difference here, right? A simple if statement. Here you had to do, I'm sure there's a more efficient way of doing it. This is the first thing that popped in my head, but a for loop, an if statement, a simple for loop, then an if statement. Still not hard. This should be done in 15 minutes max, 20 minutes at most. But this is obviously like a 2-minute question. Anyways, hope you've enjoyed this and have a wonderful day.